As we continue the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the Rose Hill Gym, we chat with one of the more familiar faces inside that gym with Roger Rooney, Fordham grad and longtime sports information staffer. Roger, it's always great to see you. How are you today?
I'm good, Andrew. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. And I was thinking, are you top 10, top five in terms of games played, so to speak, in the Rose Hill Gym? You've been in that gym as much as
I
anybody,
would
I would
think I
imagine.
would think I'm probably in the top five, but I don't know for a fact because you got to understand, I was going to games there before I was a student. I went to my first game there. My brother went to Fordham before me. My father hated sports, and my father paid my brother to take me places because my brother loves sports. So I went to my first game in the Rose Hill Gym in January of 1966 when I was 12 years old. I saw I saw Fordham play Georgetown, lose by two, but I was hooked. Uh, you know, and have been going ever since. I can say that I was there for the first game of their 25 game home winning streak in, I guess it was 66, 67, and was there for the game that ended the home winning streak in 68, 69. So I've been doing it for a long time. And I started working on the crew in February of 74 because unfortunately the guy who was my predecessor there died over the Christmas break. It was kind of depressing, and but I'd been the manager of my high school basketball team, and one of the guys who worked in the sports information department had gone to high school with me and said, "You did that stuff. Would you like to do it?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So I've been doing it since February of 74. I did my first game.
Do you have a count of athletic directors and head coaches that you've worked alongside?
Yeah, I could figure it out. I mean, uh, less. I was figuring out SIDs at one point, and I figured that
Okay.
I worked with eight different SIDs. Joe DeBarry is by far the longest served there. Joe and I have been working together over 20 years. Uh, and before that, we changed them almost every couple of years. ADs, the first AD I worked for was PJ Calissimo's father, Pete, who was sort of an interesting character to work with. Uh, Pete Carlissimo, Dave Rice, Chris Monish on an interim basis, Frank McLaughlin, Dave Roach, Ed Cull. So that was six ADs. Be a seventh when they pick us. I guess
Hmm.
Charlie's the acting, so seven with Charlie. And basketball coaches, oh God, there's so many. Uh, that the first basketball coach I saw coaching at Fordham was John Bach, uh, because he was the coach. He left after 67, 68 and went to Penn State. He was also the AD and ran the NIT from Fordham back in the old days. So a lot of people I work with, Andrew.
You have a very good seat at games these days. Who's the most entertaining coach you can remember to be able to eavesdrop on from the sideline?
Well, Joe could share this. The funniest one we ever saw was when John Beeline was at Richmond. They were playing uh, they were playing Fordham. This before they were in the A10. I think we weren't even in the A10 yet. And we had officials from, like, I'm guessing they might have been in the Southern Conference. I'm not even sure, but we had officials from the other conference there. And Beeline didn't like the call, and Beeline, under his breath, said, "You can take that call." And I won't say what he said they could do with the call, but he said it relatively quietly. And Joe and I looked at each other and said, "Did he just say what I think he said?" And the referee turned around, teed him up, and he said, "I didn't say anything." He said, "I heard it. Everybody heard it. Shut up." So that was probably the most interesting one. Um, as Fordham coaches, McCarchick was interesting. McCarchick could be colorful, and one of the nicest men you'd ever meet in your life. And the last time I saw him, my younger daughter was playing CYA basketball, and his granddaughter was playing on the other team, and I was sitting, of all things, at the scorer's table for my daughter's game because they needed somebody to run the clock.
Of course.
And but when I first started working there, I did stats, and I also at different times ran the clock. So I was running, and I ran the clock in high school. And so he came over and said, Roger, I said, Coach, I said, that's your granddaughter, right? He said, yeah, it's my son coaching. So it's like, oh, I said, the the little girl wearing number 30 is my daughter. And my daughter, her great ambition, she the great moment was when she was a senior in high school. She made it to 5 foot and a half an inch, and which and that was something that really she wanted to be at least 5 feet tall. And I remember when she was in eighth grade playing CYO basketball, she used to come up to women's games at Fordham with me, and she was going to go over to Stephanie Gately and say, Coach, in 4 years I'm going to be your starting point guard. Didn't quite happen, but
It's good
uh,
to have goals.
oh yeah. I mean, at 5'1", she would have been one of the shortest point guards in D1. But I will tell you, the kid had the quickest release you'd ever see in your life. One of the guys who coached her said, at your size, you got to get rid of the ball quick. If you're open and you think you can hit the shot, turn and shoot. And she would just catch the ball and shoot it in one motion. And she was actually pretty good by the time. But this is a kid who, by nature, is a jock. She played basketball, volleyball, and lacrosse in grammar school, and played volleyball and ran track in high school. So my older daughter had no interest. She would have been happier in the days when women's basketball was 6-on-6 because she liked playing defense but didn't like to run the court. So it's like, Beth, it's too bad. You should have played around when they were playing six-person. I actually saw a women's game with 6-on-6 at Fordham back probably in about 1967 or 68. There was a club. They were a club team, and they were playing BC's College of Nursing, and they were playing 6-on-6 basketball. Thinking 6-on-6, this is ridiculous. This is weird. But no. So, needless to say, I've been to a lot of games at Fordham. Some good, some not so good, some that I wish I'd never seen, and some that I was really glad to see.
Tell me the one that you were most glad to see. Do you have a favorite, one singular favorite game?
I have a couple. Uh, uh, I think one of my favorite was, now this is a long time ago, 1967-68, which was actually a pretty good year for Fordham. They went 19-8 and lost to Dayton by one in the NAT, and Dayton won the NAT. And the year before, Dayton had lost to UCLA in the NCAA finals, so that was impressive. We were playing that year. We were playing Columbia at home. Now, Columbia actually made the NCAA that year. That may have been the last time Columbia made the NCAA. They had Jim McMillan, who eventually ended up playing for the Lakers, Hayward Dotson, who was really good, and Dave Newmark, who played for the Bulls. And we beat them at Fordham. And that's probably one of my favorites. Um, John Prelo hitting a buzzer beater to beat Seton Hall. I guess that was 1990-91. Beating St. John's, Pecora's first year there, where we were
Yeah.
down by a lot, and just Chris Gaston throwing baseball passes to break the press, and Brenton Butler having 4 fouls at halftime and not fouling out and scoring about 25 or 30. That I always like beating St. John's. I don't know why. It's just because we rarely beat them. Uh, and I think my first real favorite was my first hero at Fordham was a guy named Bill Langheld. Bill Langheld was in my brother's year, class of '68, and when he graduated, he was like the fifth or sixth leading scorer in the history of the school. And they were playing Seton Hall, and they were down by one, and they got the ball back with about 10 seconds to go. John Bach called timeout. And instead of drawing a play or anything like that, they spent the entire timeout shooting Langheld's, spraying tough skin on Langheld's hand so he could get a good grip on the ball. And they got the ball to Langheld in the corner, hit a jump shot at the buzzer, and they won by one. That was like one of my first, and I think it cemented Bill Langheld as my hero when I was 14 years old. Um, and anything in 70-71 was fun. Uh, One thing I do remember, the only game they lost at home that year, they lost to Temple on a Saturday afternoon. And we rarely played afternoon games back then. We played night games. Even on Saturdays, we played night games. The only time you played in the afternoon was Family Day because they would invite the alumni to bring the their kids there, and they'd hand out cowbells to the kids. The place was insane. And the other time is if you were on the ECAC Game of the Week, which is before college basketball had a lot of television coverage. This is before UCLA played Houston in the Astrodome in that same year, I guess. And the thing I remember about is we lost to Temple. We weren't supposed to lose to Temple. With 13-1 after that. And then we're playing Family Day later in the year. And we're playing a really bad NYU team. NYU dropped basketball after that year. They were bad enough that they dropped basketball. And we were down at the half. And as the teams are walking off the court at halftime, Digger Phelps walks over to the scorer's table, grabs the microphone, and apologizes to the crowd and said, "I promise you this won't be another Temple." And he went storming into the locker room. He ended up winning by 15. But, which still, that NYU team, they should have beaten by 25, considering they're winning most games at home against lesser opponents by a lot. So those are a few that I always remember. And the one last one, which I thought was hysterical, we played Southern U in the NIT first round game at Fordham in 1990. Southern was the leading scoring team in the country. They averaged like 105 to 107 points a game. Their star was the guy who ended up playing in the NBA. Unfortunately, died in a car accident. A guy named Bobby Phills, and we played them, and we obliterated them. When McCartrick pulled the regulars with about 4.5, 5 minutes left in the game, we were up 100-49. And back then, we didn't have the computer program to do the stats, so I would do the equivalent of the book, the rebounds and the shots missed, and I'd call the game for the other people on the crew. And it was sort of like, so the program gives you a good description, gets the stats out quickly, but you could be more editorial. So it'd be like, Herzog on a breakaway slam, Herzog on a three from Fazand, Lopez windmill slam. I mean, it was just one of those games, just total obliteration. It was 100-49 when we pulled everybody. And we had like the last five guys, some of whom were walk-ons on the team. And we ended up winning 106-80. So the score was deceptive, but it was just, that was one of my all-time favorites, just watching. It was probably the most perfect basketball game I ever saw a team play at Fordham, at the Rose Hill Gym. But it's been interesting.
Last thing I need, Roger, I need you to tell me the Georgetown clock malfunction story from the
Oh,
70s,
that was
right?
great. That was my junior year. That was the first year I was working on the stat crew. And the other person working on the stat crew with me was a gentleman who went at the time by the nickname King Wally, otherwise known as Mike Walzeski, who's the PA announcer at Madison Square Garden for the Knicks. Mike and I had gone to high school together. We were both managers of our high school basketball team. And Mike was one of those guys. He lived near me. Neither of us lived on campus. And I would pick him up because he'd normally work on the stat crew with me. And if he was wearing a jacket and tie, I'd know he was on the FUV broadcast. So I'd say, when he get in the car, I'd say play by play or color. And he'd tell me, but this time Mike is working the stats with me. We're playing Georgetown. We're not very good. This is Georgetown. This is like John Thompson's probably second year. And they started getting better right away. They were 3-23 the year before Thompson got there. And they were starting getting better because Thompson was the coach of the #1 high school basketball team in Washington before he got the Georgetown job. And he brought most of his team with him. So they went from being bad to being okay to being good. And by this time, they were good. And so we were always having problems with the clock. The scoreboard at that time was one at each end of the gym, just had the time in the middle of it, and it had Rams and Visitor. And now the clock has stopped a couple of times during the game, and there's been problems. And so it now gets to the point that 10 minutes to go, the game is tied. And they realize they're not getting the clock to work again. So I don't know if you ever remember the little red metal clocks they used for like CYO games and things like that.
Yeah, sure.
They brought one of those out. And John Thompson is freaking. And he's just absolutely out of his mind. And he's yelling at everybody on the staff. And Pete Colissimo, PJ's father, comes out and he's the athletic director. Now, I don't, did you ever meet Pete?
No.
Okay. PJ is about 6'1", 6'2". He played three sports at Fordham. He played basketball, football, and baseball. Uh, and so Pete, though, had played on the football team around the time Lombardi played at Fordham. Pete was about 5'8" and about 300 pounds.
Hmm.
He looked like he was one of the blocks of granite, except
Sure.
he was very blustery. He was one of these guys who just would bluster. And he comes out, and Thompson is giving the guy who's been running the clock hell. He's giving the PA announcer hell because what they decided to do, the referees went along with this, that we would just run it on this little portable clock, and every minute they would announce how much time was left in the game. And for the last minute, they would announce it every 5 seconds how much time was left in the game. Thompson is just freaking. I mean, he's just really upset. And Colissimo comes over to him and said, "Coach, you got to calm down. You got to calm down. You got to understand, we've had problems with this clock all year." He said, "We spent $1,800 this week to fix these clocks, 700 on that and 800 on that." The numbers didn't add. Mike Wazowski and I are just sitting there fighting off, laughing hysterically because the numbers don't work. And Thompson looks, "Oh, okay." Thompson said, "Oh, okay." They had the ball, no shot clock back then.
Yeah.
Game is tied. He decides to hold for the last shot. This is 10 minutes. He's going to hold the ball.
Oh,
And the whole thing back then, if you were behind, you had to play offense. If the game was tied or you were winning, you didn't have to play offense. You could just stand out at half court and occasionally pass the ball to one of the other guards. So he holds for the last shot. And it gets to a minute to go. He calls a timeout. Okay, now what is he going to do? When is he going to take a shot? They go back out on the court. When they call 10 seconds, they calls another timeout. With probably anywhere from 3 to -5 seconds left in the game clock, they take a shot, miss it. We get a rebound, call timeout. We say there's 4 seconds to go in the game or something like that. Stan Frankowski was the point guard at the time. Stan Frankowski gets the ball. Darrell Brown, who was one of the best ball players I ever saw for him. Unfortunately, we weren't very gifted when he was playing for us. Darrell Brown, in the Holiday Festival final, the year after that, Darrell Brown out-rebounded USC's front court, and USC was rated fifth in the country at the time. But Stan Frankowski passed the ball to Darrell. Darrell gets the ball low. Darrell puts in a layup. All of a sudden, we hit the horn. The game's over. We win by 2. Thompson just freaked. He was just really, really upset. The only other coach I ever saw anywhere near as upset as that was in 66, 67. We weren't very good. We're playing St. John's at Fordham. St. John's is rated in the top 10 of the country. We were over 500. We weren't great. We put 5,000 people in the building. It's before they changed the fire code to say 3470 was the max. We had close to 5,000 people in the building. We had people sitting on the floor up to the edge of the paint, up to the edge of the paint on the corners of the court. We had people sitting up in the balcony. We had people sitting up on the rafters in the balcony. And back then, this is before they had the Hydra rims, where the rims are on the court. They had guide wires going up to the roof of the building, holding them in place. And every time St. John's was trying to shoot the ball, people from Fordham up in the
shaking the
rafters,
rim.
pulling on the guide wire, shaking the rim. St. John's won by 2, but Lou Carnesecca refused to play there for like the next 10 years. We played our home games at the Garden. We played at Alumni Hall or at Fordham, or at Alumni Hall or the Garden. Our home game was the Garden. And what I was told was Louis said, "I'm never playing in that building again." But he did eventually start playing there again. But they were getting to the point where they were really very good when they had Mullen and those people.
Mm-hmm.
But so those are the two coaches I remember being most upset.
Roger, this was perfect. Thank you so much for doing it. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for everything that you've
Andrew,
done for inside the
it's
gym.
always fun talking. Yeah, it's an interesting building. I mean, when I first went there, I mean, I was hooked. It was in the mid '60s. Even if they were bad, there were people there. There were always people there, uh, and I remember thinking this is really good. And other thing that you may not realize, before they opened the new Madison Square Garden, which isn't so new anymore, when they opened that in 1968, there were only two regulation courts in New York City, St. John's and Fordham. We were the only two
Huh,
regulation courts in the city. The old Garden didn't have a regulation court,
I didn't know that. That's
which,
crazy.
yeah, we were one of the two 94-foot courts in the city. And I'll tell you, my high school played Fordham Prep, and Fordham Prep used to play their home games in the Rose Hill Gym. By the fourth quarter, any high school team that played the Prep was gassed
Yep.
from trying to run the length of that court, because high school gyms are even shorter. My high school gym was like 80 feet long. So it's a pleasure, Andrew. I'm glad I could talk to you guys.